Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Barry Odell with the Mammoth Spring Church of Christ YouTube channel. It is April 16th. It's a Wednesday, 2025, and I hope everybody is doing all right today. We are ready to start John chapter 6 this afternoon, and we're going to study today the feeding of the 5,000. You've been following along. John is concerned about the signs of Christ and the fact that those signs produce faith in the witnesses. So this is this is the only sign, miracle, that is recorded by all four gospel writers. Now, the resurrection obviously is recorded, but among his miraculous activities, the healings and things of this nature, this is the only one that appears in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. You'll find it in Matthew 14, Mark 6, and Luke chapter 9, and we're going to kind of look at the surrounding context of each of those as we begin today and set a proper context for what's going on here. It's pretty interesting when you put some of the puzzle pieces together to see exactly what's happening when Jesus feeds the 5,000. Hello, Sheila. Hello, Debbie. Good to see you guys. As always, if you have any questions or comments, put them in the live chat. I'll acknowledge them when I see them. The audio is being recorded and will be uploaded to our Podbean channel. And once the live stream is over here on YouTube, I will upload the video link to our Facebook page, Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring. All right, John chapter 6. So, like I said, I want to set an immediate context here. I've got some verses that I want us to look at, but we'll just start reading. We'll read the first 3 verses here of John chapter 6, and then we'll do some wandering through the other Gospels. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. So he's up north still. Then a great multitude followed him because they saw his signs, which he performed. We're going to talk about that, which he performed on those who were diseased. And Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. So I've got some things written here in the margin of my Bible. Let's talk about these signs for just a minute, because again, John only records 7. I'm going to run over to Luke's account, see what's going on here exactly. Luke chapter 9, and what have I got here? Verse 11 is what I have written down. So here we go. And when the apostles, when they had returned, well, that's referring, and we'll look at this in just a minute too, and talk about talk about what's going on in Jesus' life. You know, it's good to discuss obviously, his teachings, Jesus' doctrine, his actions, but he's a man. He's living life. He's experiencing things. Things are going on around him while he's doing his work. So anyway, Luke 9:10, the apostles, when they had returned, told him all that they had done. Then he took them and went aside privately into a deserted place belonging to the city called Bethsaida. But when the multitudes knew it, they followed him, and he received them and spoke to them about the kingdom of God and healed those who had need of healing. So obviously you don't have this level of detail in John's account. John only uses 14 verses to describe what happens here, but we're getting a little more context here now. The disciples, the 12, have been out on what's called the limited commission. This is recorded, the limited commission is recorded in Matthew chapter 10. Go to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Don't go to the Gentiles. The Jews need to hear the gospel first. They've returned. Not only are they returning, and they're going to talk about what's happened. They're excited. But Jesus himself is teaching, and he's healing. Now, again, the specifics of this particular healing were not given. It's just there's a bunch of people that needed to be healing, and he healed them. Now, let me click over here to Mark chapter 6. This would be, again, the same context of John chapter 6. Mark 6 and, it's around verse 34, 35. Yeah, here we go. Jesus, this is Mark 6:34, when he came out, saw a great multitude and was moved with compassion because they were like sheep not having a shepherd. John doesn't record that perspective. So he began to teach them many things. So there it is again. You've got teaching mentioned in Luke. You've got it mentioned in Mark. When the day was far spent, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a deserted place and the hour is late." Basically, send them away. Verse 36. Send them away. So what we have going on here A couple of different things. Jesus teaching, Jesus healing. The disciples have just returned from the limited commission. But here's something else, and I want to point this out. This comes from Mark chapter 6 as well. John has been imprisoned. I'm trying to find where it begins here on the Bible app. Here we go. Begins in Mark chapter 6 and verse 14. John the Baptizer has been beheaded because, well, John said to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." That's Mark 6 and verse 18. Herodias held it against him. Herod feared John. I talked about that a little bit yesterday. He knew that he was a just and holy man and protected him. But when it comes down to it, Herod has to give in to those around him, and that's what he does, and John is beheaded. Okay, so you read all of that down to Mark 6 and verse 29. That's the context, chronologically, of what is of the feeding of the 5,000. Now, again, also you have the disciples have been out on the limited commission. So let me turn over here in my Bible so I can actually see it before I try to click to it. So over in Luke chapter 9, it starts in verse 1, this account. Then he called his 12 disciples together and gave them power and authority over all demons and to cure diseases. And he sent them out to preach the kingdom of God and to heal the sick. I don't know how long they were gone, but they've got a lot to do. Well, they returned, Luke chapter 9 and verse 10, and told him all that they had done. Then he took them and went aside privately. So all of that's going on. John, and remember, John is Jesus' cousin. He's 6 months older than Jesus. He's been imprisoned. Now he's dead. And you get to these other accounts again, Mark and Matthew and Mark and Luke, and Jesus is just absolutely, I don't think overwhelmed is the right word. I don't know that you could overwhelm Jesus, but he is surrounded by activity, tragedy with, again, the death of his cousin John. He's surrounded with the excitement of the disciples. They've been able to go out and do what he had sent them to do, and they were able to perform these miracles that he had empowered them to do. He's got multitudes following him. It's the end of the day. They're hungry. He has compassion on them. The disciples don't want them around. That's a full day. Now, I don't know that John was beheaded the same day, but I'm just saying that he has a lot on his plate. Let's say it that way. And for the gospel writers to record, the disciples want to send them away, but Jesus looks at this crowd with everything he's got going on. He has compassion on the crowd. Now, I think this would be a temptation for me, for any of us. We're going through a lot. We've got people pulling us in one direction. A relative of ours has just died. We've got a multitude pulling us in another direction. I don't have time for compassion for you. I've got all my own stuff to worry about. That could be an easy pitfall. And I think it's perfectly human. We would feel overwhelmed. I don't have any doubt about that. But in the midst of all of what's going on here, Jesus being surrounded by a multitude and all these other things, he takes the time to teach this multitude and to heal their diseases. But also, now let's get back to John chapter 6, to feed the hungry. Now, give me just a second. John chapter 6, that's where we are. All right. So, up north, Sea of Galilee, you again see that he's being followed, and not just by a few people, by a great multitude. Why? Because they saw the signs. And that's what we were just reading in Luke 9 and in Mark chapter 6. Jesus went up on the mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. Be nice to have a little peace. Be nice to have a little time alone. But he's not. Passover, a feast of the Jews, was near. So now at least a year has passed since some of the other events we have read in John's gospel so far. Then Jesus lifted up his eyes, and seeing a great multitude coming toward him, he said to Philip, "Get them out of here. I've got a lot on my mind right now." Again, that's kind of what I was saying. That might be something that I would be tempted to say, or that you would be tempted to say. Hey, Lyle, good to see you. But he looks at this multitude with compassion. The Greek word for compassion, it's a hard word to pronounce, but it literally means he's moved on the inside. And he's got to do something about this. Where are we going to buy bread that these may eat? Notice this statement here in John 6:6. He said this to test Philip. He already knew what he was going to do. Where's Philip's mind in all of this? Again, he's one of the disciples that when all of these people are around, it's like, send them away, get them out of here. Anyway, Philip answered, 200 denarii worth of bread is not sufficient for them. Okay, that would be a large amount of food, that every one of them may have a little. It wouldn't be sufficient even for that each person in this group would have enough to eat. Now, here's the thing. As we're reading these texts, okay, you get down, I'll just go ahead and do it. I'll skip down here to verse 10. Jesus says, make the people to sit down. People is the generic term, anthropos, okay, mankind. But then it says, so the men sat down. Now that's the gender-specific term, aner. And you could literally read it, so the males sat down, in number about 5,000. And one of the other gospel writers, I can't remember if it was Matthew, Mark, or Luke, but they said there were 5,000 men besides women and children. So we, again, obviously more than 5,000, but at a bare minimum, 5,000 people are getting ready to eat here. Well, again, 200 denarii, that a denarii, from what I understand, a denarius, 1 day's wage, that would buy a lot of food. But 200 days of pay wouldn't be enough to give everybody just a little bit. Well, Peter speaks up, or rather Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, speaks up. There's a lad here has 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish, but what are they among so many? We don't have the money. It's getting late. There's a little bit of food over here, but that's worthless in comparison to what you're saying, let's feed them. Make the people sit down. Again, as the text has already revealed, what verse was that? Yeah, verse 6. He knew what he was going to do. But you think of John's narrative and the miracles that he's already performed. And then, of course, you have the other gospel accounts that are recording many other miracles, and including the miracles here that are referenced back up in verse 2, the signs which he performed on those who were diseased. And we looked at that in Luke 9 and Mark chapter 6. He knew what he was going to do, but the disciples are trying to figure out, can we scrape together enough money? And this kid over here has a little bit of food. In the presence of the one who has performed, well, he's turned the water to wine. He has caused the lame man or the infirm man to get up and walk immediately. What are they not picking up here? What are they missing is the idea. Debbie says it's a good thing that Jesus doesn't get overwhelmed like we sometimes do. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. He took on flesh and blood. He lived life. He experienced life, the pressures of life, the pressures of his popularity, death. Okay, Lazarus. We'll get there. John chapter 11. Jesus wept. He experienced everything that you and I experience, and yet he was able to do what he did. And he didn't treat people with contempt and like his disciples wanted to do here with disregard. Just get them out of here. They're bothering me. We have, as the book of Hebrews calls him, a faithful high priest. And he's qualified to be our high priest, the one who appears before God for us, because he lived life just like we live it and experienced what we experience. We can't ever lose sight of that. We can't ever lose sight of that. All right, so back to John chapter 6 here. Make the people sit down. Now there was much grass in the place, so the males sat down, in number about 5,000. Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed them to the disciples, and the disciples to those sitting down, and likewise of the fish. And look at this little phrase here at the end of verse 11, as much as they wanted. Remember, you go back up, 200 denarii, and that would give each one maybe a little bit. But he takes the loaves and the fish that this boy had, this lad, 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. And this word, I was reading a thought on this last night, this word for small here in John 6 and verse 9, somebody said, these may have been fish about the size of a sardine. I've never eaten sardines, so I don't know exactly what size they are, but I know they're not large. He gives it to the disciples distribute it as much as they wanted. That would be something to see. It's like, how exactly did this play out physically? I don't know. Did he have it in the presence of everybody that could see what he was doing, and he keeps pulling stuff out and giving it to the disciples, and the disciples keep doling it out to everybody? I don't know exactly what it looked like, but everybody had as much as they wanted. So when they were filled, okay, again, it's not just a little snack here, okay? He said to the disciples, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Don't waste things. That's one of those things you kind of grow up with. As a kid, you eat everything on your plate. Don't be wasteful. There are hungry children all over the world that would be happy to have what you have. Well, that's a Christian principle, not to be wasteful. Well, gather up the fragments that remain so that nothing is lost. Therefore, they gathered them up and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves which were left over by those who had eaten. So not only did everybody get all that they wanted so that they were filled up, verse 11, but now you've got 12 baskets full of leftovers. What is the response to this miraculous occurrence? Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, this is truly the prophet who is to come into the world. Now, again, that's a reference to Deuteronomy chapter 18. It was either Monday or yesterday that we looked at that. I'll just click back here real quick. Deuteronomy 18:15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from your midst, from your brethren. Him shall you hear, according to all you desired of the Lord your God in Horeb in the day of the assembly, saying, let me not hear again the voice of the Lord my God, nor let me see this great fire any more, lest I die. Talking about what happened at Exodus 19 and 20 with the deliverance of the 10 Commandments. And the Lord said, what they have spoken is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you, Moses, from among their brethren, and will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. Now again, and the other day when we looked at this, I took you over to Acts chapter 3, where Peter applies this prophecy specifically to Jesus. Acts 3, the quote is in verses 22 and 23, as you can see there. And then Peter goes on to say in that sermon in Acts chapter 3, he references Moses in Deuteronomy 18, and then he says, yes, and all the prophets, from Samuel and those who follow, as many as have spoken, have foretold these days. When you sit down to read your Old Testament, don't ever forget Acts 3:24. Moses spoke of Jesus. It was yesterday. Now I remember. We went to Genesis 3, Numbers 21, the bronze serpent on the pole, Deuteronomy chapter 18. Moses, he then references by name Samuel, and all the prophets who came after that spoke of Christ. When you read your Old Testament, don't ever forget Acts 3:24. It's an interesting thing to do as you're reading through your Old Testament. I've got one Bible. I don't have it in here with me, but it's a King James Version. It's a wide margin. And as you're reading through your Old Testament, there'll be a little star after some verses. And that's a marker for that particular Bible, whoever the publisher was. I think it was World Publishers. That's how they identified the messianic prophecies of the Old Testament. They put a little star at the end of that verse. But I've heard people say, well, the Old Testament's boring. The Old Testament's too long. There's too much information. So I'm just going to read the New Testament. Well, you're missing the words of Moses and Samuel and all the prophets who follow spoke of Christ, spoke of his power, spoke of his kingdom. You're skipping all of that. And to have the mentality that, well, the Old Testament's boring and I just don't get anything out of it, well, then you don't know what you're looking for, and you really don't know what you're missing. We need to be good students of our Old Testament. All right, enough of that little rant. Let me get back here to John chapter 6, and we are in verse 14. All right. Then those men, when they had seen the sign that Jesus did, said, "This is truly the prophet who is to come into the world." And again, that's exactly the purpose of biblical miracles, to produce faith in those who witness them. And also, of course, to confirm the word that had been spoken. This is such a, and I don't know if this is exactly an accurate way to portray it, but this particular miracle is of such importance, all four gospel writers record it. Now, that doesn't mean that all the other miracles are not that important, but there's something about this one. Is it because all the stuff that's going on, like I told you, the limited commission? So think about that for just a minute. When he sends the 12 out, I don't know how long they were gone. They had to be gone for a lengthy bit of time. Who's with him? What's he doing during that time? We know what the disciples are doing. They're traveling from city to city, and they're preaching, "Repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand." Where is he? What's he doing? John the Baptizer, his cousin, is in prison, and he's beheaded. Multitudes are following him. Is it because of all of that this is the one miracle that's recorded by all four writers? I don't know. Whatever the case may be, the sign, the miracle, accomplished its purpose. This is the prophet. This is who Moses was telling us about. And if you remember where we finished up yesterday, I'll just scroll back up here in John chapter 5. This is obviously a different crowd because remember John 5 ended, "If you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" Obviously, he's dealing with a different crowd. And that context there of John 5, verses 46 and 47, is the context of healing the infirm man who was like that for 38 years. So, the feeding of the 5,000, Matthew 14, Mark 6, Luke 9, and John chapter 6. It's a good practice when you have parallel accounts like that to read them all. Notice the differences. You've got four writers, four different perspectives. One will record something that the others didn't, and that's not contradictory or anything like that. It's a different writer. So, guys, that's what I've got for today. There's not a lot of comment to be added. He fed the 5,000. It's just interesting to notice all those contextual clues as to what's going on. Now, immediately after that, and this is where we'll start on Monday. This is Wednesday, so this will be the last stream for this week. We're going to look at his fifth sign, Jesus walking on the sea. And this is like immediately after the feeding of the 5,000, what happens here. They were about to come and take him by force and make him king. You still see that misconception among the Jewish people that he's going to be another Davidic warrior king. They're going to take him by force to make him king. I don't think you force Jesus to do anything, but that was their idea. All right, so we're done for today. We'll pick up back there on Monday, Lord willing. All right. Hey, Connie, good to see you. Oh, your fridge went out. Well, that's no good. Hopefully you can get that straightened out. Guys, I appreciate you being here today. Hey, if you would, please give the video a like. Audio is recorded. I'll upload this to our Facebook page as well once the stream is over. We will be live tonight on our Facebook page, Church of Christ at Mammoth Spring at 7 Central. We're going to look at Exodus chapters 28. Let's see. Exodus chapters 29 through 31, and then chapter 35. I'm grouping these last several chapters in together because you have the instructions for the tabernacle, and then you have the construction of the tabernacle. I'm not going to do that chapter by chapter, verse by verse. So tonight, if you don't have anywhere to go, if you're not able to get out, join us at 7 Central, Exodus 29 through 31, and Exodus 35. Let's see. Debbie, you're welcome. Lee, what are your thoughts on how these miracles are impacting his followers as time goes on? Are you asking like in the sense of in his day, in the first century? If that's what you're asking, that was kind of rolling around in the back of my head as I was talking today. You turn the page in your Bible to John chapter 7. He's fed the 5,000. He's walked on the sea. He's still in Galilee, John 7:1. He didn't want to go to Judea. That's down south. That's where Jerusalem is, because the Jews were seeking to kill him. Now, that's an interesting thought, because martyrdom is not something he was seeking out. He was not seeking out persecution. If he could avoid it, he did. Feast of Tabernacles, his brothers say, well, why don't you go down there where everybody is for this feast, and why don't you do some of your miracles down there? Because, I mean, nobody's going to do that in secret. If you do these things, listen to that. If you do these things, show yourself to the world, for even his brothers did not believe in him. That's an amazing statement, isn't it? John 7, verses 4 and 5. So if that's what you're asking about, Lee, that's a pretty good indicator right there. Now, there are many people believing in him, no question about that. But even his own siblings didn't believe in him. And you notice here, verse 3, his brothers therefore said to him, and then verse 5, his brothers did not believe in him. His popularity is still growing. It reaches we might say its climax or its zenith with the triumphal entry into Jerusalem, Matthew chapter 21. That's just prior to him going into the temple, as recorded in Matthew 23, and just working over the Pharisees and hypocrites. From that point on, things go downhill. But anyway, verse 14 says the prophet, not a prophet, yet you refer it back to who Moses was talking about. Do you think that the disciples made that connection this early on or after the cross? That's a good question. And I don't know that I know the answer, just to be honest with you. Do you think the disciples made that connection? Well, let me get back up there that's a long way to go. 70 verses in John chapter 6. Let me get back up there to verse 14 here. Yeah, so who are those men in particular saying this is that prophet? Well, is it connected to the disciples of verse 12? The disciples gather up the fragments. They gathered them up. Then those men, when they had seen the sign Jesus. So it seems grammatically that this is talking about the disciples. But even though that is the case, they've witnessed many miracles, and they still struggle. I don't think they struggle with accepting Jesus as who he is, as that prophet, but they still don't understand the kingdom. They still don't understand Jesus' mission. And that goes all the way even after his resurrection. And we read that in Acts chapter 1 about the restoration of the kingdom to Israel. So I think there's maybe a couple of different ways that we could look at that. Did they make the connection to Moses? Seems they did. To me, that's the way I would answer that right now. John 6 verses 12 and 13 preceding then those men of verse 14. The evidence is there. They're witnessing all of these things. But then just to think about that, you've got Jesus walking on the sea, and they're afraid until he says, "Don't be afraid, it's me." Then they willingly received him into the boat. Who else would it be? We'll talk about that, because they had some superstitions about death and spirits and things like this. Phantoms, one of the Greek words used is phantasmas. We might say ghosts. Anyway, hopefully that answered your question. I know I don't think it's a great answer, but he says, "Thank you." Well, you're welcome. Pray as I struggle to develop a solid faith, not moved by situations. God is still a God of miracles. He is all-powerful. He's the God. Paul says this is 2 Corinthians 1, verses 3 and 4. He's the God of all mercy, the God of all comfort. He's powerful. He's in control. And that's why we're told to pray in James chapter 5. The effective, fervent prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. Elijah is just like us. He prayed to God, and God changed his mind. God acted. So, we can all struggle to develop our faith sometimes. In fact, the disciples prayed or asked Jesus, what is it, Luke 18? No, it's Luke 11. They said to Jesus, Lord, increase our faith. I think that's Luke 11:5 maybe. We can all struggle with that. But you got to keep your nose in the book. You got to know what God says and what God expects, and we can know what God says and God expects. All right, guys. I think that's it for today. I appreciate you being here. I appreciate the chat. I hope you have a good rest of your day, and I hope to see you back in here Monday at 2 o'clock.